It brings me great pleasure to have been invited to deliver this statement alongside the Young Leaders panel. I feel very strongly about this important demographic who we all rely on for advancement of our society. I could begin my statement by repeating the familiar overused cliches such as the youth are the leaders of tomorrow, the youth are the future, the youth will change the world, and similar platitudes. While these cliches may indeed be true, I believe our young people, 1.8 billion of our world's population, deserve deeper acknowledgement and scrutiny than being reduced to a series of cliches. We live in a very different and fast-changing world today. Social media has forever changed the way we communicate and made the world a much smaller place as we are all increasingly interconnected. Yet, despite this increased interconnectivity, we also live in a world faced with enormous social challenges. 1.8 billion of the world's population are youth aged between 10 and 24, the most interconnected generation of all times. We also live in volatile times, rife with instability and conflict. Many argue that social media and interconnectivity has created a generation of followers, not leaders, and a generation of engaged and interested only in trivial pursuits. Today's youth is often accused of being too engrossed in following social media and in self-absorption to be leaders. But social media has been used by young people all over the world to lead, to make change, and to hold their seniors to account. In Myanmar, for example, social media has been used to fill the void of the government in fighting hate speech. In the Middle East, the Arab Spring began in social media and helped youth organize an unprecedented revolution that started in Tunisia and spread to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, and the other Middle Eastern countries. Young activists fighting for a variety of causes, ranging from human rights to climate change, rely on social media to get their message across. What remains constant amidst all the cliches is the age-old question: who is going to lead the movement for positive change in our world? In my opinion, the answer is very clear. Throughout history, the most successful movements were organized by the youth, including the civil rights movement and many historical protests against unjust policies, wars, and politics were conducted by the youth. Youth movements have always played a major and an invincible role in history all around the world. The reason for this is because young leaders are inspired by ideas rather than trends, and they stay true to their ideals, regardless of the cost, never giving up despite the many challenges and obstacles placed in their paths. The same idealistic attitude that often earns them a bad reputation is precisely what makes them good leaders. Whilst it is not uncommon for veteran leaders to lose motivation and simply go through the motions of leadership half-heartedly, having lost faith, young leaders are inspired and push themselves through their uncompromised ideals and motivation to make positive change for their future. Through these ideals, young leaders are able to exercise authority over themselves and their peers to lead civic engagement and reform. Much lies on the shoulders of youth leaders because it is they who will lead change and pave the way for a brighter future. This can be seen in youth movements all over the world. In Jordan, for example, youth leadership is emerging as a significant movement. This is inevitable in a country where the majority of residents are aged between 15 and 35. The future of an overwhelmingly youthful population can only be led by its own youth. This couldn't be more evident than when Jordan's 23-year-old Crown Prince Hussein, the son of our king, gave a resounding global speech at the United Nations General Assembly, taking it upon himself to address world leaders and remind them of their duties and responsibilities, addressing his peers and calling on his fellow youth to take ownership and the future into their own hands. Crown Prince Hussein introduced himself as an advocate of the largest generation of young people in the world. He's an example of someone for whom youth empowerment is very important because without it, his country cannot thrive. In today's world, the tables have turned. Patriarchal societies can no longer thrive. It's a new world led by the youth and whose future depends on young leaders because they have the motivation, the idealism, the skills, and the power to do so. I wish also to add that at the Jordanian Senate, where I am a member at the moment, there is a special committee that has recently been formed to address the issues of the youth, and it started meeting with several representatives of the youth from universities and civil society organizations to address the issues and to listen to the youth and to reflect on their concerns and the matters that are of most important for them. The global youth movement is yet again gaining momentum all around the world. Marches, youth-led revolutions all over the world are becoming the norm. In some Asian countries, young girls have led their own movement against the practice of child marriage, demanding their right to attend school in safety and not to be forced into underage marriage. They have defied their parents to fight for their rights and freedoms. In India, for example, young people have been fighting against child labor through youth-led movements, and similar stories can be found all around the world as the youth movements gain force. In the Middle East, the powerful force of the Arab Spring and its associations with social media has had a dramatic impact on our region as well. In the United States, it is the youth that is leading the movement against gun violence because it is they who are most affected by this violence. After the Parkland School massacre on February 14, 2018, a group of students, amongst them survivors and some as young as 11-year-old, galvanized by the tragedy of the massacre, took complete change in organizing the March for Our Lives, an anti-gun violence event in Washington, D.C. that was emulated in hundreds of towns and cities across the globe. To push forward their movement entitled Never Again, they began contacting politicians to advocate legislative change. They are challenging and taking on the government and holding their government responsible for the safety of children's lives. These kids are holding their politicians accountable and taking power over who they vote for in order to safeguard their lives and future. According to these young students, their politicians have failed to control gun violence, failed to protect them, failed to safeguard their generations, so it is up to them to take matters into their own hands and ensure it never happens again. And similar stories can be heard all over the world, young people mobilizing, taking matters into their own hands to make positive changes for a better future and a better world. Far from being pathetic, young people are challenging their governments, holding them accountable, and demanding change. Gerontocracy is definitely a thing of the past. However, the two can be reconciled. It's not a case of young people being set against the older generations. It's about mutual needs, benefits, and understanding between the two demographics. It's about major changes that need young leaders for them to materialize. So beneath the familiar cliches, there are very valid reasons why they ring true. It is the idealism, the motivation, and the ability to not give up and to challenge the status quo that makes young leaders the effective leaders they are. To put it simply, young people have the power to change the world, and they will. They can be the driving force behind the development and peaceful existence of any nation of the region. Thank you very much for listening to me.
For the second keynote speech, I would like to invite Besim Begaj, Minister of Innovation and Entrepreneurship of Kosovo.
Good afternoon to everyone. And I thank you for coming here and listening. The middle age, people speaking about the young leaders, the people who have to show some, maybe the best examples how the young generation should be treated. On my way to Istanbul yesterday, actually day before yesterday, I was talking to my son, who is 15 years old, about the future, what he wants to become in the future, what kind of profession. I'm trying to put him out of politics because I don't think that it's healthy for the young people to deal only with politics. And when I asked him, what do you want to be, my son? He said, I want to be happy. So I think this is the key message that we have to deal. This is the key message that I think we who are in politics, in policy creation, have to create environment for the young people to be happy. And how difficult it is to be happy, and how difficult it is to be professional, how difficult it is to be social in these days, I think everybody knows an answer, because it's not an easy task when all young people are humbled with a lot of information which they really don't need sometimes, and with a lot of politicians who are around themselves and speaking a lot and doing not that much. And this brings me back to my political party when we were talking about youth and the engagement of the young people in the party. A young lady who currently serves as ambassador in the United States in Washington, ambassador of Kosovo, one of the senior guys in political party was telling to the young people, you are the future. And the previous speaker, ambassador, said that young people are the future of the country. And she turned out to us and she said, can we be the current perspective of the party, not always the future of the party? Because I do not accept that every time the young people are addressed, that they are future of the developments. So when we speak about the youth, I'm very, very happy, very proud to be speaking on behalf of the most young nation in Europe. Kosovo has a really young population. And we are challenged as a politicians by them. We are challenged because they are moving much faster than we are moving. They are smarter than we are. They are moving in technology much better than we are. And in discussion with my students, when I speak to them, when I say, what we can do for you, one very smart, very bright, very open guy told me, the best thing that you sometimes can do, the older people, people who have served quite long time in the public life, is to not make obstacles for the young people. So what is the characteristics of the leader? Is to be charismatic, is to be smart, to be social, to be friendly, to take decisions. That's perfect. But if we go to the Carnegie, he was saying, let's remind each other that we're speaking about the humans, not about the machines. And today we are living the life where we are speaking about empowering the young generation. In the same time, a lot of challenges we are facing with technology. Today we are living the world when the computers are part of our lives. When mobile phones are more present than the number of the people. I do believe that today in the world there are much more mobile numbers than the current citizens in the world, especially in the European Union. This is the matter. The technology is helping us to create workplaces. So productivity is raised by technology. It's being part of the life, in the daily life. But how we can build our leaders for the future? By treating fairly the current situation. By taking responsibilities in the current situation. And one would ask, who is a leader? Normally, we can expect that a powerful personality is a leader. A self-confident person is a leader. A charismatic person is a leader. But overall, is an integrated human should be a leader. And if I just recall Jack Ma at the World Economic Forum in Davos, he was saying, we should change the attitudes of the education in the world because we cannot compete anymore with computers. We should teach our youth, our kids in education, and education means how to behave, how to be human, because at the end of the day, everything, technology and everything goes hand in hand with those developments. Being minister in a small country and being for the fourth time minister in different sectors, I've been Minister of Finance. It's easy to be Minister of Finance because you are very well framed. You know exactly what you have to do. You have to make a fiscal policies, to collect the taxes, to put them in the right perspectives. But being a Minister of Innovation and Entrepreneurship is very challenging for me. Very, very challenging because there is no frame. We have to design the future altogether. And designing the future is to deal according to the youth and according to the youngsters, what they expect from us. And sometimes not all the governments, not all the people are really understanding how things are going. So the overall globalization is needing very much empowering digital economy. But how we can do this digital economy and how we can let's say bring that digital economy and technology into the economic sense. This is my vision. I'm by profession, I'm an economist, and I try to put things into the figures and figures into the human relations, which is quite hard. So by investing in education, by investing in research and development, investing in private sectors is the key thing to make youth capable to be charismatic, knowledgeable, and as well to be the people who will lead our future. Whatever we say, whatever we go to listen about the big politicians, big entrepreneurs, big people who have changed and who are marking the fourth revolution of industry in the world, at the end of the day, they are human. I'm speaking about the human because sometimes we are too technical when we speak about the future. So, speaking about Kosovo and the role of the youth, I can tell you that we are trying at least not to prohibit them from the future developments. And we are having a great generation, great generation. We're having some girls who are working on open data, and they were declared by Forbes magazine 30 under 30. And we are proud of them. Very proud of them. Young ladies who are changing the world. Recently, one of the girls from Kosovo has been granted by NASA from United States as the 24 under 24 is the 24 girls in the world that they are changing the vision how to look the overall scientific developments. So how we can support them is by education. How we can support them is by opening the doors. How we can support them is by not closing them opportunities. And that, let me conclude my remark is that, and the message for the young generation, whatever you want to be, you have to be happy and you have to be a good one in whatever. This does not make any difference. Are you going to be a leader in business, leader in science, leader in culture, leader in politics? At the end of the day, the leaders are who follows the spirit. And the spirit is the leader, the people who really believe in the group work and the good values and the positive side of the human beings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now I would like to invite our moderator and the panelists to take their seats. Our moderator for the session is Maurice Wright, partner at Mercury LLC, and the panelists are Michael Kotakis, Director, 1989 Generation Initiative LSE, Vasilis Apostopoulos, President of Hellenic Entrepreneurs Association, Ali Sina User, Vice Chairman, User Holding, Laura Batalla Adam, Secretary General, European Parliament, Turkey Forum. Thank you.
Good morning. We have a couple more. Afghani, I want to have you to join us if you can. You want to join us? And where's the minister? Minister, I'd like you to join the panel as well if you can. Why don't you come and join the panel as well? Yeah.
And Michael, you are Michael? Oh, Michael.
Good morning. Good morning. Look, I want to make sure this is a more of a lively discussion. I haven't hosted. Ambassador, are you going to join us as well? Well, I haven't hosted in a while since my television show, but what I want to do is to keep this lively and interesting for the panel and for the audience. There's three things that I sort of want to cover, and I'll throw it to all the panelists, and then we want to try to get some Q&A from the audience because we want this to be a little more participatory and more interesting. We're talking about youth. There's some people on the panels that are still young, unlike myself, but we all want to talk about what it is about youth, the youth panel, youth leadership. There's really three areas that I wanted to focus on was challenges, major challenges facing youth, generational leadership versus new blood, and then the other one is really a question of brain drain and this protest movement that we see these days. So, Laura, since you're the only woman on the panel, which is sort of weird when we're talking about youth, you know, women are the future, I want to go with her. And I have you to talk a little bit first about, Laura, do you have a mic? Does she have her mic? You there? Yeah, I want to start with you first and talk a little bit about challenges from your perspective. Please.
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm looking.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're with us.
Yes.
All right. And most importantly, there's no filibustering. This is no grandstanding. We want to keep this interesting and lively for the audience. So please go ahead.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges now we are seeing is a generation change. So the baby boomers now have been replaced by the millennial generation. So nowadays, since last year actually, they have been taken over and they represent the largest employee demographic. So I think in this demographic change, we have to assess the way in which we can make the most of this new generation, which at the oldest, millennials are now around 37. So I think, while many of us sitting around the table today, we are included in this category. And they make up to 2 billion around the world. But the truth is as well that it's not only, they are not concentrated, for instance, in Europe or the European Union, where I come from. Almost half of them are concentrated in China and India, so in developing countries. In this regard, for instance, at the European Union level, they only make out around 24% of the population, while we have a democratic challenge going on. So nearly 50% of the population nowadays is aged 50 and older. So I would say one of the biggest challenges would be to really try to make this millennial population the fastest growing one and the most, in a way, capable of running the new role of work and as well leadership. So we have to empower them more than ever. Like the minister, the previous speech, he was saying, I think the youth, and in this regard, millennials are regarded as the future in this sense. So they should be empowered more than any previous generations, I think, on the one hand.
What does that mean, though? What does that mean by empowering them? And frankly, are they capable of running it right now?
They feel ready. I think when many surveys, they feel ready about taking this leadership. And there has been some surveys run in the US, for instance, where half of them said that they would like to establish their own business or entrepreneur idea, or they have already done it by now. And they feel empowered. They feel they have the skills to do so.
Is it empowerment or an entitlement? Because a lot of the millennials I know think that they should walk through the door and be CEO without any experience, without being any contribution. So is it really empowering or an entitlement?
It's both, actually. In the one hand, they need some guidance, but they also feel very independent. They feel like they can take this challenge themselves, but they need this mentoring and this training as well. And they're demanding that. And this is not going to be found most likely in university courses. So this is either found online or it's found in any other kinds of more innovative mentorship strategies, for instance. They value feedback coming from different chains. Actually, it doesn't need to be always, it can be upward. It can be them mentoring older generations and also getting something in return for that. But they need both to take the challenge, so they have to take this lead somehow and to be given this task of leading somehow. And in the meantime, they have to be trained for that.
Great. Ali, what does that mean from a business standpoint? Do you agree with that? What do you think from a business standpoint? You're a second generation in the family business. What do you think of that?
Well, if you're going to talk about me, it could be a little different. But if you're going to generalize the topic, it's a lot different situation. For example, when I finished my studies, I came back here to work with my dad. And I had, in the beginning, I didn't do much. I was just doing the usual work, what I had to do, little stuff. And as the years went by, they started to hear my voice. And I got to implement what I wanted to implement. So, as she said, the generation difference makes a lot of difference as he's a traditional worker and I'm a more technological based, and my way of thinking is a lot different. So, for example, if we're going to talk about Turkey, it's a developing country. Therefore, there are families with more than 3-4 children. There are people whose resources are limited. They could be having trouble in becoming a leader. So when you ask a question, do you become a leader or are you born a leader? I think it's a bit of combination of both, because it's about your resources and about your resources helping you grow. So
Are there enough resources to help you grow? If you don't come from a traditional or if one of the big families, are there enough resources for a person that's born in abject poverty to rise up in the developing markets?
there is chance for sure, but it's very hard to be heard, to let your voice heard. Like as an example, there can be some very smart guy with very great ideas, but he might be having trouble having his voice heard. So this is the biggest problem, I think, in the young leaders.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Mr. Ambassador, because you have the spectrum of India, one of the largest economy, both with challenges, but you have a great entrepreneurial class, and people are making it, whether they were Mukesh Ambani's kids or someone generally. So India seems to be doing something interesting. Is it, what's going on there? Is it the entrepreneurial class or is it resources from the government? Yes, sir. The question is, we were asking about, we were talking about Ali's family and the challenges for youth, and we were talking from an entrepreneurial standpoint. India has done well with really innovation. What's going on in India that's going right? Kosovo is similar. You have one of the oldest countries in the world and one of the youngest countries in the world. Minister, maybe you jump in and talk about what are you guys doing, some of the things to overcome the challenges for your youth to get more, whether it be politically involved or entrepreneurially involved.
Okay, do I have to focus on the challenges in my country?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a very strong and vibrant
Could you pull the microphone? We can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. We have a very strong and vibrant young movement in Jordan. As I mentioned, the majority of the population are between the ages of 15 and 35. I'm not going to mention a figure because figures vary, but it's really the majority of the people and the most effective instrument in moving public opinion through social media. And as the minister mentioned, I cannot see one Jordanian moving around without a mobile, not only a mobile, but also interacting with the machine, from young children in schools till even older generations. So the impact of the electronic revolution on the behavior of the population is becoming immense and severe. Of course, the reliance on these machines, as it erupted recently, and without putting the proper controls, and when I mean proper controls, without putting restrictions that could be misconstrued as restrictions on the freedom of expression. But it is a double-edged in the sense that sometimes there is abuse. And since you can hide behind a machine and say whatever you like, or send a video, or fabricate something, it is becoming somehow a nuisance. But being so does not mean that restrictions should be encouraged in a manner that would exceed the necessary limits for creating constructive controls. From there, I would like to say that the young are encouraged by, first of all, the top leadership, His Majesty the King and the young Crown Prince, who is really a very important driving and inspiring force for the young, and I mean the young men and women. We have, for the population of the country, which is just about 7 million, but Jordan is now has more than 10 million. One third of the population are not Jordanians, but never mind. Out of the 7 million Jordanians, for the 7 million Jordanians, we have about 24 universities. Each young man and woman would like to finish university education, at least for the first degree. And you can imagine how much energy, how much potential these young people have in trying to enforce a lot of change upon the government. And as I said, it's not a clash between older generations and younger generations. It is an interaction, and often positive and constructive. So while we encourage the youth, we encourage youth movements, we listen to them, we address their concerns. Mainly, we have too many graduates, university graduates, for finding occupations for them, but we encourage them to be inventive in creating their own occupations and trying to support the economy and feed the economy with their skills, which they acquired.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. I want to cut you off. I don't want to filibuster. I want to keep it moving. So if we can just quickly, Minister, talk a little bit about what you guys are doing locally to support your youth and challenges. And I want to come to Michael and talk about segue to politics, please.
Okay.
I think what's the most important thing is to make critical thinking in the country and education to be transformed. Why I'm saying critical thinking and active citizenship is a key thing, because we have to put the young generation out of the frame. Things which have been working for a while is not going to work in the future, most probably. So that's why we have to build that critical thinking with education system.
But what real concrete things are you guys doing, and what entrepreneurs are you guys creating? You know, you're one of the youngest countries in the world, so it's interesting that you guys.
When I'm saying education, I do believe that the essential part of it. If you want me to talk about the measures that the government is taking, that is a different story. I mean, with supporting them in education, but again, I do not believe because I was hearing here about the mentoring. I do believe in the mentoring. I believe in much more in a sharing, in a coaching system for the young generation. I mean, Ali was saying about how he was perceived, and in some way, the inner voices of the young generation are kept within themselves. And if you hear the last speech, which is, I do believe, one of the best speeches I ever heard about the Steve Jobs at the student ceremony, when he said, "Do not let others to live your life." So that is the message. But how to deal is that not all generations are the same generations. I mean, if we speak about the future, most probably all the youngsters who are now maybe the primary school, when they became able to work, most of them will work jobs that do not exist today. So basically, we don't have the role model that we can show that as parents, if they are in business or in politics, things are the same. So that's why I'm saying critical thinking, education, not framed education, but education which gives them openness and to open their minds for the future. This is easy to say, it's not easy to do, but this is the way I see the young generations to develop in the future.
Michael, it's interesting. You have Jordan, you have Kosovo, right? You couldn't be more different from countries in longevity. How are you seeing the politics? Because you had Arab Spring here. We know how Kosovo emerged. Politics play a major role, but how do you make that transition from the movement to sustainability to then a real economic that's going to change lives? Because at the end of the day, people get in politics but because they want change. That change ultimately has to do with economic consequences.
Well, I would say that the way that politics is currently done is not conducive to the type of politics that young people want. What I mean by this is that politics has traditionally in the last few decades been ideology-oriented. So are you left or are you right? And what does that mean? And an ideology would offer a sort of full gamut of different aspects, features, offerings, etc., policies, ultimately. But young people today are much more issue-oriented. They want to get into politics not because they want to back a particular ideology, because they want to back or support implementation of a particular issue or addressing of a particular issue that they find very important. And they might not want to be involved long term. They might want to be involved around a specific issue such as climate change, such as human rights, gender equality, things like this, for a specific amount of time, and then that will be the end of their engagement. And I say, as an elite, as someone who has spent a lot of time with political scientists at the London School of Economics and others, have not really cottoned on to that quite yet. And so there is a gap between capabilities, or let's say what is out there, and what is expected from young people. So young people expect a politics which is more tailored to the type of world that they live in, the type of interactions that they're used to having. Young people generally congregate online, and yet politics hasn't really made the transition to being fully fledged online. So you see a lot of archaic mechanisms, old-fashioned mechanisms in politics. And there are some, of course, examples of countries attempting to bridge this particular gap. Estonia is a phenomenal example of a country that's trying to do a lot about this. Of course, it's a very small country, therefore these things are more easy to implement. But Estonia has a very well-functioning system of e-voting, and there is an alleged and also now proven link between e-voting being rolled out and then turnout. Young voters are turning out in higher numbers in Estonia than in other countries in the European Union. So there are certain changes that we would need to make as, let's say, a political class, or a political scientists as well need to start advocating for these kind of things. And indeed, the young generation needs to become active in trying to set these types of things up. But we need more crowdsourcing. We need a lot more openness in our democracies. We need party structures to change, to become more focused around specific issues and not around particular ideologies. And for this to happen, we need not only entrepreneurs in business, as we have many on this panel, of course, and they're extremely important, but we also need civic entrepreneurs. And civic entrepreneurs are those who build institutions, civic institutions, that stand the test of time. And ultimately, that's what we need. We need institutions that reduce transaction costs for those who are participating in them. We essentially need to make the process easy and better than what we have now, and we need to prove that it actually works. Estonia, as I said, is an example of a country that's done quite a lot in e-voting, but we need to go further than that. Party examples are very important as well. There are some up-and-coming parties across Europe that are attempting to adopt this more grassroots, issue-oriented approach, and they are gaining traction with the youth.
But doesn't this just really come back to leadership? You know, it really comes down to leadership, right? If you are a great leader, you attract people get motivated, right? Is it sustainable for this generation to only care about an issue at a time, right? And frankly, can we count on these guys, right? If you looked at the Brexit guys, they counted on them and they regretted it, right? And if you look also at what's going on in the youth, it's a lot of protests, right? It's a protest movement. It's a protest generation. Protest doesn't necessarily turn into votes. So how do you bridge that gap? Is it technology? Laura, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, but how do you bridge those things, those divides?
Well,
To me, it's leadership. Everything boils down to leadership.
I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. And we do need more, as I said, civic entrepreneurs who act as leaders, who set these things up and show that they work. You know, it's the same in business. You know, Apple didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because a guy had a vision and wanted to set out and do something, right? So the same in politics. You need individuals who show that things can be done, who challenge the system and the status quo, and through proof that this actually works, they get others to do the same thing. And so it becomes a movement of people trying to do the same thing that eventually becomes institutionalized, because movements turn into institutions and they stay.
Laura, do you agree with that? Laura, do you agree?
I think one of the characteristics, it's not working. Hello, yes. One of the characteristics that defines the youth nowadays, I mean, not only these protest movements, I think they have an eager to transform things, so to question the status quo somehow, but also to transform. And one of the definitions, one of the things that defines them the most is this eagerness to empower others. So I would say young people, we are ambitious, but we are ambitious not in the negative sense of power or making more money, but trying to empower others. And when they reach this leadership position, that's what they would be willing to do, to empower others in the fields that they are working. So I think it's kind of being a bit more impatient, but traditional values of work, for instance, like they value more work-balanced life, for instance, and they value more the values of it and the policies that they are working for.
I just want to I don't think that making money is negative. I just want to make a comment. Ambassador, I'd love to get your opinion on, it's interesting the whole Arab Spring that went on. Why it didn't happen so much in Jordan? Is it really down to the king and the king's leadership? I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, thank you very much. Partly so, yes, but also, you know, the situation in the Middle East and the situation in the Middle East and in the Arab world is suffering from instability for almost 7 or 8 decades. And people are normally consumed in practical problems. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia out of a very minor incident, which one would think, why should an incident of a street vendor selling vegetables, having trouble with the police, ignite such a massive revolution? Not only in Tunisia, but it quickly spread into Egypt, Libya, and Syria, and many other countries. And we are still, you know, witnessing the reverberations of the Arab Spring, although some condemn it as being rather destructive rather than constructive, judging from the results as we see wars raging still in Yemen, Syria, and Libya, just finished in Iraq, the rise of extremist trends, the rise of terror, the desecration of religion and the values of, particularly the values of the religion of Islam. So it's a very confused situation. But the younger generations, the university graduates and students, played a major part in trying to challenge the old trends, challenge their governments, challenge corruption, challenge dictatorship, demand radical political reform. And they were focused. In that sense, they were really and truly focused on very specific issues, and they were united in pursuing these issues. And in countries like Tunisia, to a certain extent, in other countries, I wouldn't like to name them, it made a lot of difference. Maybe the Arab Spring was thwarted, and it wasn't brought to the desired ends in some parts of the Arab world, but it's been a stage. It's an eruption that's been aborted, but I think the latent powers of the revolutionary zeal, particularly amongst younger leaders, is still there. And it might soon start again, hopefully in an orderly manner that would not lead to the negative manifestations we have seen and we are still seeing in some Arab countries.
Well, it's also
but in Jordan, the situation was different. We don't have, a leader who has been in office for so long. We have a constitutional monarchy. The king did indeed lead the reform himself, and when there were demands in the street for constitutional monarchy, he immediately urged the government to revise the constitution and see if there was room for balancing the powers between the authorities, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. It should be done. And I think 1/3 of the articles of the Constitution were amended and revised in that direction. Right. So there are 3 factors in Jordan that helped. Yes, the leadership, and it's a continuation of the leadership of King Hussein, who was in power for 47 years, and the country during his time was passing from one serious crisis to another serious crisis, mainly imported, not homegrown, nothing to do with the small country of Jordan itself. Right. And also the people of Jordan are mature enough to realize that reform is not a one-time transaction. It should be revised all the time, and it could not be done all in a drastic manner at the same time.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're gonna try to move quickly because we're standing between people and their lunch. But quickly, I wanted to get the Minister and Ali. Clearly, Europe is going through a lot of change. A lot of that is dealing with youth. A lot of that is dealing with despair. What is your opinion on the future movement of protests, particularly youth and economic? And for you to minister, and then Ali, what do you see as the solution? And is it all economics? Is it economics and civics? I'd love to hear from a business perspective. But Minister, please.
Well, I'm pretending always in my cabinet and in my daily work to bring the youngsters on board and to give them a free hands to work on things in order to prepare the different view, because sometimes I do believe that the knowledge is saturated among the generation. But in some way we have to mix it. When I became my first time advisor to Prime Minister on macroeconomic issues, we were all young people educated in Europe and in other places, and an observer, a social politician, came to train us how to do it. He said, listen, it's great, it's very nice, you are all young people, very well educated outside, but who from you can tell your boss that he is not right? Well, we try to give a kind of explanation. Yeah, we can do it. He said, no. None of you are at this stage daring to say to your boss that he's not right, because your future is depending on him. So he said, you need someone who is mature and who has not aims to grow in the future, so in the kind of mix of everything. What I'm trying to say is that if we mix generations with open minds for the future, where we are losing sectors, we are not losing jobs in economy these days, we are losing sectors, is the best way how to manage it. While for the protests and for the whole thing, I think there is a mismatch of the human values sometimes with, because I don't believe that it's only needed, focused on profits or focused on business. A colleague said about the social leadership, which is needed, which brings the people much more interconnected. As long as the young generation, again, I'm going back to my theory about education and active citizenship, they have a cause, they have a goal. The protests are right, but we are seeing all around the world the protests because of anger. And the protest of anger is not a protest. It's ruining the whole future of the generations. This we have seen in the Balkans, which is producing more history than economy. And what we are trying to do is, let's produce more economy and more happiness than worse.
Ali, we're going to let you, Michael, you can jump in. We'll let you have the last thing, but touching on the minister's point, is it all economics? You know, if you have a job, you don't protest. If you want to have impact, you employ folks. Is it all goes down to that? I'd love to get your opinion and have you both of you guys to jump in as well.
I partly agree, but I don't think it's just economic, because the technology have developed really fast. So I believe we're in a transit period, and I could say the new generation and the old generation have very different ideas, very different traditions. For example, I think, let's say the world has been developed for the last 100 years, and all the regulations, all the rules that are applied right now, they have been done in the past 100 years. And now the new generation, with the development of the internet in a super high speed, the youth are having problem integrating into these rules or into these ideas or into the system. So maybe the youth, the young people, not the youth, but the young people must be heard a little more. Maybe the traditional way of things should be changed and implemented into today's technology and maybe young people's ideas, because at last the young people will be the ones leading in the near future.
I think we're out of time. Michael, did you want to say something quickly?
I
I know we're out of time.
just want to jump in on the question about protest movements. I think yes, that the movements nowadays, youth movements, are very much oriented around protests, and there isn't enough of a persuasion element. That is crucial. We need to be able to persuade those who attempt to move, not simply to protest, because protests, you know, they have a kind of end date. There's a sort of expiry. After you do the protest, that's it. It's over, kind of thing. You know, what about the long term? So persuading is about creating a long term, whereas protesting is simply standing up to the man and sticking it to him in the short term, for want of a better phrase. So we do need to turn our movements into more persuasive to incorporate a more persuasive dimension if we're to make this long-lasting change. And just on the point that Ali raised about the speed of innovation and the slowness of our institutions in catching up with that, I think that's a very important point. We do need good regulation, not much regulation, but good regulation to be able to bring this type, or to harness, let's say, this type of spurt in innovation, because as we've seen in the past, following very quick spurts of innovation, if not correctly managed, they may be dangerous. So we need to manage them in a limited way to have the absolute benefits of these processes without incurring the potential costs. And I think that's an important point as well.
Yeah. Thank you to our moderator and panelists for their thought-provoking discussions. This year, Bosphorus Summit has planted a tree in the name of our participants. May I kindly now invite Erol User to present the certificates to our distinguished guests. Thank you. Thank you to our speakers for the interesting panels. We will be taking a lunch break now for an hour. During lunch, Mayor of Marathon Greece will honor us with a speech. At 2, we will be back with the panel entitled The EU in Search of Visions. Thank you.